Hello, everybody. My name is Mike Obsatz. I am Professor Emeritus from McAllister College in St. Paul. I taught sociology and education classes at McAllister for a total of 40 years, and I've also done workshops and men's groups and boys groups all over the country. And I'm going to talk to you today about the world's pain and where it comes from and what happens and what we can do about it, and the need for love and spiritual connection as a way to overcome all this pain. So previously I've done a video on from empire consciousness to oneness consciousness, and that was about looking at empire as a system where people are oppressed, where people need to control other people, where people are hurting, where there's a power difference between the haves and the have-nots. It's a system of oppression that involves racism and sexism and heterosexism and ableism and ageism and any other ism you can think of, where there are in-groups and out-groups. And out of that comes the world's pain. And the idea that you can have enough and be more and strive for more, it's a world of never, ever having enough to feel loved and lovable yourself. So it's an attempt that people have to look outside themselves for joy and happiness and fulfillment, when actually they need to do two things. One, look inside themselves for spiritual connection, and two, do something to help heal the world on the outside. So we're going to first talk about children in trauma, children who are going through hard times and challenging experiences. And it's going to be about abandonment, abuse, and something that isn't talked about very much, which is called forced conformity into a dysfunctional world. Now, what we're talking about is that the world is already dysfunctional, and families are dysfunctional, and parents are dysfunctional. So we'll start with children and then go to where does the pain in the world come from, and see how those things are connected. So all children are born with parents who are imperfect, who've had to cope with a world living out of scarcity, fear, and lovelessness. And there's a bunch of books on this. One of the main ones is The Drama of the Gifted Child by Miller. But there's so many other ones. The Culture of Narcissism, The Pursuit of Loneliness. So children need feelings of safety and love for who they really are. Most children do not receive love for being who they truly are, and they do not receive protection from the ruthlessness of the world or the dysfunction of their own families and the world. And they don't learn to navigate a world that isn't necessarily going to support, love, and care for them. So they're powerless and helpless as infants and small children. And I think we all come from that feeling of powerless and helplessness as small children. We grow, so because children hurt and feel unlovable and unsafe, we as children develop defense mechanisms to cope with all of this. Some children blame themselves and consider themselves unlovable. They internalize shame from the parents or caretakers. And there are lots of books about the internalization of shame. And most children grieve their losses. Since almost all children are traumatized and abandoned into a world, they develop into a world that can be hostile. They develop ways of protecting themselves. And defenses, while they are unhelpful in certain situations, really are survival mechanisms for a lot of children. So one kind of defense is tuning out and just not being present, not paying attention. not really being emotionally invested or involved. Another one is aggressive, hostile behavior. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I am angry all the time. One way of looking at this process of not being able to be loved for who you are is that the response to that is grieving the loss of one's authentic self. And as you have to conform to norms from a culture, which would include, if you're a girl, certain things that you're supposed to be, if you're a boy, certain other things you're supposed to be, what you basically have are adults who were, as children, not allowed to claim their own wholeness, be really connected, and feel really loved for who they are on the inside. And that's what everybody really needs, is to be loved for who you are on the inside. So coping strategies keep the people, children, from feeling the pain of this abandonment, because it would actually feel way too devastating to feel all of that suffering and pain. And children need strategies to navigate the world, so they do not learn these strategies. So first of all, there is helplessness and powerlessness, and then there are strategies for coping, which children never learn. So children develop defenses to survive and to make it through dysfunctional family systems, schools, organizations, and a world that doesn't necessarily let them be who they fully are and doesn't validate them for who they fully are. So these defenses become coping mechanisms, and people grow up becoming loyal to them because they save their lives. And so what you end up having is children who are addicted, children who are hostile and grieving, children who are hurting and sad, a vast amount of depression. And there are just so many books written about the results of this abandonment and trauma experience. So we understand that that is a serious issue. Trauma and abuse become embedded in the brain and in the body. So work to change and work on this trauma involves so many layers. There has to be a cognitive understanding of what happened. There has to be emotional release and letting go of the pain and suffering. There has to be looking at all the defenses, and there has to be learning all the navigational strategies that one can use to maintain one's wholeness in a world that doesn't accept that. If you want to be a whole person in the world, the only way to really survive that is to create a connection to your spirituality, which gives you something to hold on to when the world itself is causing all kinds of destruction and pain in your life and in other people's lives. So we have a lot of suffering, we have a lot of pain, we have a lot of loss, and we have a lot of addiction, depression, loneliness, rage, anger in the world. Now, the solution to this is spiritual, and we'll get to that in a minute. Healing the world's pain involves looking at where all the pain comes from, besides looking at all this individual abandonment and trauma that young children experience. So I made a list, and I'll share a few of these. There are people who are hungry and starving. There are people who are shame-based and hate themselves. There are people who do not feel safe wherever they live or wherever they are. There is a belief in scarcity, that there's not enough to go around, and there is trauma, which we've talked about. There is feeling unlovable, and then there's all the natural disasters. the overcrowding, the not enough space, the violence, the wars. And one of the things that we have in terms of suffering is suffering that is necessary, that just is inevitable as part of being alive. And then we have the unnecessary suffering, which we create in our systems and our families, which cause more pain. And what we can do is something about the unnecessary suffering. We can't do a lot about the necessary suffering except to survive the best we can. So when we have people who do not feel safe, who are hungry, who do not have shelter, who do not have medical care, and who are hurting on the inside, those people grow up to be parents, and they have children, and they do some of the same dysfunctional things to their children. So it becomes a cycle of behavior that goes on. And if you take the expression of the pain, which can involve need for validation from the outside, it can involve grieving process, it can involve addictions, and then ultimately violence against self and violence against others, and never enough. So there's an arrogance and a judgmental quality, and the idea of a we-they mentality. And a we-they mentality just means separating people into labels and groups. So the only way to look at this is the pain causes a reaction, which ends up causing more pain, which causes more of a reaction. And that cycle is an empire cycle. It is the cycle of external rewards and validation without internal support and love. So it's a loveless, meaningless experience. If you want to reverse that, you have to find love, and you have to find meaning, and you have to find purpose. Once you understand the world we live in is dysfunctional and causes all kinds of pain to people, there is a whole lot to be done. It's our call to help and work on change. And there's a lot of people working on some kind of change on a political level. There's people working on change on an emotional level. There are people working on change on a physical level. But one of the most important ways this cycle gets interrupted and changed is through a spiritual intervention. And we have to have a spiritual intervention in this culture where people finally get the message that what matters is that everybody is safe and everybody feels loved. And until that happens, this cycle will continue. So the world's pain becomes individual pain and trauma. The trauma produces more pain and more trauma. And that goes on cross-generationally. And the results of that, shame, depression, grieving, anger, war, hostility, all are based on the idea that there's not enough and you're never enough. So you have to continue to prove yourself, but you never can really prove that you're enough. You're not strong enough, capable enough, attractive enough, whatever the enough is, you're not. So spiritual growth and connection and providing for all are the two most important things that have to happen. We have to have enough for everybody and start redistributing the resources in the world so that people get what they need. Until we do that, there is always going to be external strife and pain and war and violence. It is not going to go away until the basic needs of everyone are met and that there's a feeling of safety. That's what Maslow said. He was my first psychology teacher when I was 19 years old. And he said, until people feel safe, and by the way, nobody's safe till everybody's safe. So spiritual growth involves facing the reality and taking some action internally first, one person at a time, and then communicating that to as many people as those who will listen, that there is another way. Now, Jesus did this a long time ago, and there have been other prophets that have said there is another way, and there is a better way, and there is a more love-filled way. Barbara Coloroso, in her book, Kids Are Worth It, talks about the backbone family, and she's alluding to ways in which we learn in a family system how to really navigate and be supportive and really listen and validate and love it within the family. And that's a wonderful thing, and the book is excellent. But we have to go beyond the individual family to the world family, and we have to start changing the way we view what it means to be a person, what it means to live a life, and what it means to be part of community. So community is the only answer to this pain in the world. And by that I mean community where everybody is valued, loved, and accepted. Everybody is treated with respect and dignity. So the flow of love means that we can really feel joy when we know that we are lovable, loved, and loving. And spiritually, some people would use the word God. I'll use it here. Whatever you want to use is fine. You can use spirit if you want to use another word for it, or anything else that means spiritual connectedness. Knowing God loves us, we can feel that indwelling divine love which gives us peace. We don't have to earn it, prove worthiness, or make huge sacrifices. We are lovable and we are loved unconditionally. And this is a really crucial thing, to be loved unconditionally. And spiritually, if you know that, you can not depend on, you don't have to depend on people in your life to validate you. You don't have to have external wealth or success to know that you're worthy. So knowing this means that we do not need the appreciation or acknowledgement of others. They're nice, but they're not crucial to our well-being, calm, and peace. This knowing frees us from codependent living. As a result, we have the energy and intention of loving the world and everything in it. It means sending out love despite circumstances and situations in which we find ourselves. As part of the flow of love from God through us to others, we experience a oneness which transcends any differences or barriers. We always see the divinity in the diversity. And this is a very powerful thing, to see the divinity in the diversity, because you have to realize that even though we're all unique and different, there's also a core similarity and sameness to all of us. So ultimate joy means that we are no longer a child of biological parents. As children of God and of the universe, we are free to be love, express love, and act out of love, and we become part of the flow of love. And that is the solution to trauma and abandonment, is no matter what the world is like, no matter what your family did to you, no matter what other people might say or think, or even if they try to hurt you, you have to learn several things. One is to take care of yourself and to love yourself unconditionally, which means you've got to feel it from the inside out. It's got to become an inside job instead of an outside job. The world exists and you have to navigate it and live in it, but you don't define yourself by its terms. So Jesus said, be in the world, but not of the world. And that's how he talked about it. So I have a number of items, I think, that can really help in this spiritual awakening and awareness, which removes a person from the cycle of trauma, abandonment, and despair to one of hope and trust that you can love and be loved in the world and give yourself to the world in a way that heals. Because this trauma cycle that we're talking about is in desperate need of healing. So here are some things that I believe can help. One is to be grateful for the good stuff. And that means to be grateful for every good thing and pay attention and notice every good thing in your life, which means your health, the sunshine, whatever good there is. And put out the good stuff as much as possible. Put out love, put out listening, put out paying attention. And don't expect perfection either from yourself or other people. You can grieve whatever sadness you want to grieve about the world, but you can't feel it too deeply because you have to realize that there's something greater than all that sadness. And once you connect to that, what is greater than the sadness, you feel the joy and the fullness of what it means to be connected and loved and compassionate. So connection, love, and compassion are the solution to the cycle of trauma and abandonment. And it has to be an inside change. As well as once you work on changing from the inside, you do as much as you can to change the outside. Put out the love, put out the caring, and also do whatever you can do to feed people, clothe people, make sure they have shelter and medical care, make sure everyone feels safe. And that's a complicated thing to do. That means loving nature, loving animals, birds, the earth itself. It means paying attention to the climate change. It means really noticing how we are part of the environment and treating the environment and earth with care and love as opposed to selfishness. So here are some other things. Enjoy what you do have, but help other people have more than they have so they have enough. Realize that enough is the goal for everybody, and everybody who can have enough will then be able to operate from there and start being able to spiritually connect themselves. We've done a lot to create a world with a lot of technology and a lot of devices that remind us how different we are and how separate we are and how we're not enough. And I think we need to use them with care because they can be defeating and also divisive in terms of how we see other people. So yes, everybody is unique and different, but everybody is the same on the inside. Connect spiritually in ways that work for you. Love yourself even when you mess up, and let go of the need to be right, and see yourself as continually learning and growing and being in process, because we are all in process and we are all growing and changing. So the way to deal with all the suffering is to be love, know love, spread love, and share love. And that's what we got to do.